everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here's the video that you came here for. With that said, though, let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, I will tell you, it's late January. It does feel like college football is starting to slow down. Transfer portal is closed. Most of the best players have found landing spots. National championship has been decided. Bowl games, on and on and on and on and on. I know there's a player or two left to commit in the 2023 class, but it feels like for the most part, we're kind of past college football and into college basketball. But there is one piece of news that continues to kind of keep the college football news cycle going. It came Tuesday morning, and here is what you need to know. Bill O'Brien, Alabama's offensive coordinator, took the offensive coordinator coaching job with the New England Patriots. And so, if you're the Alabama Crimson Tide, this is what I'm doing. If you're watching on YouTube, you see me kind of just looking around. I'm trying to figure out. Alabama's got the best coach of all time, the #1 recruiting class, all the facilities in the world, but they're missing two very important things. They're missing their offensive coordinator. They're missing a defensive coordinator. It is January 25th, and they have zero coordinators right now in Tuscaloosa. And so it's really interesting, right? Because I do think that in the past, I think everybody would have kind of freaked out and tried to figure out what's going on. I should mention, by the way, in addition to Bill O'Brien taking the New England Patriots offensive coordinator job, Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator, left last week for the same job at Ole Miss. And so, like I said, I think there'd be kind of this belief, even if it was 2, 3, 5, 10 years ago, like, what's wrong in Alabama? What's going on? Why did both coordinators leave? I am here to tell you right now, today, this second, that this was by design. This is what Nick Saban wanted. And I believe this is not only the best thing for Alabama football, I'm going to take it a step further. I think this shows me that Nick Saban has the edge back that is needed to get Alabama back to the top of college football. Not saying it's going to happen. It's not going to be easy with the way Georgia's rolling right now. The Big Ten is going to be good next year with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. LSU's coming up. Texas A&M is at least interesting, always plays Alabama tough. So I'm not here to say Alabama solved everything by firing both, or not firing, but getting rid of both coordinators. But what I am here to tell you, this is by design, and this is a good thing for Alabama. And so it's interesting because I think if you don't follow Alabama football on a day-to-day basis, you'd probably sit there and say, well, Torres, what do you mean this is good? How can it be good that both of these guys are leaving? Again, it's by design. And again, I think it goes back to this past season. At most schools, 11-2, Sugar Bowl appearance, that's good enough. Think about it in 2 years from now. 11-2 easily gets you into the college football playoff. And I think at all but maybe 3 or 4 schools, that is a successful season. 11-2, get to the playoff, lose in round 1, whatever. That ain't the standard at Alabama, not where Nick Saban has won 6 national championships. And even this time last year was coming off a title game appearance where they lost to Georgia. And so why these two moves specifically are important is this, is that if you look at Alabama this season specifically, you couldn't place the 11-2, losing to LSU, losing to Tennessee, and almost getting beat by Texas, Texas A&M, Ole Miss. You can't place it on one thing. If you go back to this season, it was really both sides of the ball that struggled. Offensively, the offense was way too reliant on Bryce Young. And as the season went on, it was Bryce Young this, it was Bryce Young that, a little bit of Jahmyr Gibbs. But what did you start to hear about Alabama? You started to hear, well, the wide receivers just aren't good enough. The O-line just isn't good enough. And what I kept saying during the season is, I said, Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time. He's also the greatest talent evaluator of all time. So you mean to tell me, over the last 3 years, the greatest coach and the greatest talent evaluator of all time missed on every single wide receiver he recruited, except for Jamison Williams, who he got out of the portal last year. And every single offensive lineman that he's recruited over the last 3 years, sorry, I don't buy it. Something was happening when those kids got to campus. Something was happening when those kids got in that facility, and it wasn't good enough, and it wasn't to the standard of Alabama. Defensively, it was kind of the same thing. Don't go and look at the season-long stats, because Alabama was great against Utah State and Vanderbilt and whoever. Some of the teams that they played that were kind of on the lower level of things. But look at who Alabama was in their big games. Look at the fact that Tennessee jumped up 28-3 before Alabama even knew what happened. Look at the fact that Quinn Ewers was moving the ball up and down the field before Alabama even knew what happened. And if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt in that game, I think most of us think Texas wins. Arkansas was moving the ball early in their game. Texas A&M was in a position to win that game. Now, that wasn't really the defense, so maybe it's not fair to talk about Texas A&M. But I bring it up because that was the situation with Alabama, is that on defense, they looked completely lost. There were 2 or 3 games where they came in completely unprepared, and that's on top of the offense that in the 2 years that Bill O'Brien was in charge, they really couldn't get any production out of wide receiver except for one guy. The offensive line was in shambles, never established a run game. That is who Alabama football has been the last 2 years. By the way, it speaks to the fact that it's pretty incredible that they still went 11-2 this year, and their 2 losses were on the final play of the game. But what this says to me is that Nick Saban looked himself in the mirror this offseason and said, you know what? I don't really care about 11-2. I don't really care about almost good enough. My standard is the best team in college football hoisting that trophy at the end of the year, and we don't have that right now. And so what I love about this is Nick Saban saying, this is not good enough. We need to be better, and we are going to start from scratch. And so the one thing about Nick Saban, I don't think he gets enough credit for. We talk about the X's and O's, the wins, the losses, the recruiting classes. What we don't talk about is his ability to evaluate coaches. Lane Kiffin saved his career. Steve Sarkisian saved his career. People forget. Brian Dable, that guy with the New York Giants that everybody was praising up until this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles, he coached at Alabama for a year under Nick Saban. Defensively, Kirby Smart, Jeremy Pruitt, who we're going to get to in a minute, on and on. And so what I love about these 2 moves from Nick Saban, he kind of forced him out. He didn't have to fire him. It doesn't have to look bad. Now he can go get the guys that he wants. In terms of who's next, I'll just be blunt. I made some phone calls over the last couple of days knowing that Pete Golding was out as the defensive coordinator and that Bill O'Brien was going to be. I don't think there's an obvious answer. If Nick Saban knows who he wants, he's hiding it really well. Couple names for the offensive coordinator job. Jeff Lebby, who actually worked for Lane Kiffin last year at Ole Miss, 2 years ago at Ole Miss. He was at Oklahoma this past year. That would not surprise me at all. Kind of comes from that Art Briles coaching tree. A lot of passing, a lot of this, a lot of that. But he's been at Oklahoma the last year. I think it would make sense for him to get out right now. Oklahoma feels like a sinking ship, especially as they go in the SEC. I also saw some Joe Brady, who was the offensive coordinator, or he was the passing game coordinator for LSU during their title run. He says he doesn't want to come back to college football. But if you can go to that Nick Saban coaching rehab, and in 2 years you're going to be a head coach, it's probably worth it. I've seen a little bit of Cliff Kingsbury, who's in Thailand right now, hanging out by the pool. I even saw a little Scott Frost, our guy who runs the Torres on Bama Twitter page, is adamant that he wants Scott Frost. I don't know if I see that one, but the point is Nick Saban is going to have his pick of guys that he wants. The defensive coordinator position, I think, is going to be really interesting. Bama fans want Jeremy Pruitt. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if Greg Sankey is going to stand in the way, as Tennessee is currently under investigation for the indiscretions of Jeremy Pruitt, but that is the guy that Bama fans want. But the bottom line is I could go on and on about who's a candidate, who's not a candidate, what does it mean, who's legit, who's not. That doesn't really matter. What matters today, this second, as I record with a hotel room in the background, what matters today is that Nick Saban said to himself, you know what? Being good isn't good enough. You two, we're going to make sure you find a landing spot so I don't look bad, but y'all got to get out of here and we got to get better people in these positions. I think it's a great sign for Alabama. And I'll tell you this, it does feel like Nick Saban's on a little bit of a tear since the end of the season. Destroys Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl, signs the #1 recruiting class by a mile in college football. And now he's going to go hire 2 coordinators, and I bet he's going to knock them both out of the park.